Hi, I'm Phil Curry. The thoughts in this presentation are the result of a 45-year career which has allowed me to gain experience that I'd like to share. This presentation focuses specifically on how to conduct research to identify the relative attractiveness of distribution channel alternatives. When implemented successfully, identifying all possible distribution channel alternatives and selecting the most appropriate can make a substantial difference to the income and profitability of any business. This diagram is an attempt to illustrate a very simplified flow of produce from farms to consumers. Similar diagrams could be drawn for value chains in developed or developing countries. The degree of complexity will vary depending on the industry and market. For example, in a developing country, there will be many actors who collect horticultural produce from small farms, accumulate it, sometimes grade it, and sell it on to other wholesalers or at wet markets. In developing countries, supermarket retailers are generally an emerging sector, but roadside retail is much more predominant, and there can be many hundreds of them. In developing countries, there is also the emergence of more sophisticated wholesale distributors, who are increasingly involved with grading and some form of processing, which may be simply washing or minimal processing for on-selling to specific food service customers, retailers or wet markets. In developed countries, most fresh produce goes direct to processors, supermarkets or wholesale markets, and from there it finds its way to consumers who purchase the product from food service outlets such as restaurants, clubs, pubs, catering companies, or to retailers including large-scale supermarkets, convenience stores or greengrocers. Whilst many farmers are attracted to retail, especially the large chains of retailers, supermarkets prefer to purchase from a smaller number of large-scale operators, which means all the other farmers have to find alternative distribution channels. The problem, however, is that distribution decisions are complex and frequently dominated by large-scale multinational actors. However, in my experience, many farmers and food manufacturers do have alternatives available to them, but they do not always consider the alternatives, and by not doing, they may be missing sustainable and profitable market opportunities. In my experience, there are many different market opportunities for most agribusinesses, including small and medium-sized enterprises. Despite this, many are attracted to just the major supermarket chains, probably because they represent the largest volume. However, I have found that identifying and understanding alternative market opportunities, prioritising them and developing an ordered and structured plan to commence in some and then expand into others is especially important for SMEs. Users in each segment will be looking for different product benefits and features, and it's important to understand the opportunities and competitive challenges associated with each segment before finalising product development. Each segment will provide different opportunities for volumes and margins. A balanced portfolio of customer distribution channels often provides the optimum results for SMEs. This thinking can also be applied in international markets. Owners or managers may not have the time to analyse the relative attractiveness of different distribution channels, but this is something that can be done gradually over time and can be delegated to others or even outsourced. In my experience, this is an investment worth making, as finding and securing attractive market segments wherever they exist in the world can contribute significantly to an organisation's bottom line, as it secures additional distribution channel and cash flow for the business. The first step in mapping out a market is to identify all of the distribution channel alternatives available. This starts with the recognition that customers for most commodities exist as processors, food service users, or retailers, and that none of these should be excluded without a good justification. So I always start by developing a description of each type of industrial, commercial or retail business that exists in all distribution channels for the product of interest. You can't identify them all individually by name because there are too many of them. However, you can, and should, describe the different types of businesses that exist and identify the largest 3 to 5 in each category. The best way to do this is spending initial time on the internet and telephone. It's exploratory research that will allow you to start drawing your market map. The second stage involves visiting 3 to 5 of the largest actors within each group that you have identified to learn about the group so that you can assess its relative attractiveness to your business. You'll be pleasantly surprised to discover how willing people will be to meet with you if you set up your meetings the right way and conduct them similarly. I've conducted approximately 2,000 meetings over 25 years in 25 countries, and I never had any problems having almost all the questions that I asked answered by people with whom I met. I learnt that it was important not to conduct these meetings as sales calls, but rather as an opportunity to exchange information and to provide samples to obtain feedback as part of that discussion. I've explained how to conduct this type of exploratory meetings in a separate video presentation. Here's an example of identifying distribution channel alternatives for a range of vegetables in southern Philippines. You can pause the video if you want to see the detail. In the first image, you can see that we were able to find out the weekly demand for each type of actor in all the distribution channels. In the second image, you can see that we were able to find out the buying and selling prices per kilogram of the vegetables of interest by each actor in each vegetable chain. The third image is a simple diagrammatic representation of the complex flows of vegetables along the distribution channels that join farmers to consumers in this market. The fourth and fifth images demonstrate how we were able to present the data collected for analysis, and you can probably imagine how we were able to use this data to compare the relative attractiveness of each of the distribution channel alternatives for farmers with whom we were working. By adopting this careful and thorough approach to mapping distribution channel alternatives, we were able to help farmers develop a strategic plan for market development that was consistent with their capacity to produce. The research team identified attractive potential customers who were willing to collaborate with the farmers and help them develop the systems required to become reliable and valuable suppliers. And this was seen as a step towards helping the farmers become better equipped to supply distribution channel members who were closer to the end consumer and who would pay more for their vegetables, but who also had tighter specifications. By the way, I acknowledge the very excellent work completed by my friends at Visayas State University and University of Philippines Mindanao in this project, as they did all of the hard work of data collection, analysis and facilitation. Even though the previous example was from the Philippines, the message is the same for farmers and others in developing countries, including Australia. That message is that a portfolio of customers made up of different distribution channel members can strengthen business profitability and sustainability by reducing the risk of having all your eggs in one basket. It also provides an opportunity for produce of different qualities to be sold into markets that require different specifications. For example, a horticultural producer who sells their vegetables to a major supermarket chain in Australia may have a substantial amount of vegetable that is outside the perfect specification required for retail. Finding processors or food service customers that will take the product for processing is a very effective way to increase the customer base and strengthen the organisation. Even better might be that the farmer does some pre-processing and then supplies a value-added product to those same customers. An Australian example of mine that benefited greatly from research to understand alternative distribution channels was an Asian sauce manufacturer which had a focus on retail. We made dozens of telephone calls to many different types of potential users to understand their current behaviour towards Asian sauces, and discovered that fine dining and 4- and 5-star hotel restaurants mostly used an apprentice chef to make their Asian sauces once a week. These two groups of restaurants simply were not willing to use the sauces available because they knew they had been manufactured from lower quality ingredients. They needed their sauces to be made from fresh ingredients. Of course, pubs, clubs, catering companies and others that we called were all very happy to use the less expensive sauces, and it was quickly apparent that the attractive food service target audience for this manufacturer were the more premium restaurants. When we visited with sample of products to chefs in 4- and 5-star hotels and fine dining restaurants, I can still remember them frying off the client's sauce and immediately responding that they could smell the fresh raw materials and that they would be perfectly happy to use them in their restaurants. When we asked the chefs from the fine dining restaurants how much it was costing them to produce their own sauces, they couldn't tell us. Executive chefs from 4- and 5-star hotels, on the other hand, knew exactly how much they were costing, and they were willing to tell us. The simple reality was that the gross margin available by supplying the same sauces as were being packaged by this client and sold in retailers, but package them for food service that does not require expensive labelling or marketing, the gross margin achieved from that sector was more than twice the gross margin that was available in supermarkets. Of course, targeting such a niche segment is small, but we all know that we are managing our businesses for the sake of net profit, so we're managing the bottom line, not the top line, and when the profit that could be earned from a small but attractive segment is considered, it made a very worthy contribution to the company's overall bottom line. Targeting high-end restaurants also formed the basis of an export market development strategy, where targeting retailers internationally would never have worked because the competition was so fierce and cost competitive. The photo you can see here is one that I took of all of the products that we deemed to be competing with the client's product, with which we were working on that occasion. We could see that the market was extremely competitive and that multinational organisations had recently released their product ranges with multi-million-dollar promotional budgets, and that there was absolutely no way the small and boutique client manufacturing very high quality product would ever compete. Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation. Identifying attractive market segments is an important part of developing an organisation's capability and sustainability, and something that requires particular research skills. If you would like to learn more about those skills and develop them within your own organisation, I'd be delighted to help you.